Hello, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. Now we will be moving on with our post-lunch session, which is a panel on exploring use cases, architecture, and risk management strategies for LRTs with our moderator, Sam Hart, and speakers, Amir from Puffer, Mike from Ether.fi, Kilian from Swell Network, Nick from Mellow, and Kratik from Renzo.
Very good. You ready to start? Thank you all for coming. Still people filling in. So we have an illustrious panel today. We have a big panel. So not totally sure how many questions we're actually going to get through. Just to start, if we could go and introduce who you are, just say one unique thing about your protocol.
Absolutely. So Buffer, we're one of the first permission keys that deployed on Eigenlayer. Anybody can run an ETH node on Buffer. We heavily focused on infrastructure and redefining infrastructure in the Ethereum layer 1. And recently we have announced the launch of Buffer Unify, one of the first base rollups that take advantage of base sequencing. And it's going to introduce many good and bring many good UX and user experience to Ethereum L1 itself. So thank you for having us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mike. I'm one of the founders of Ether.fi. Ether.fi's long-term goal is to make DeFi easy and accessible to people. And the first part of that journey and accomplishing that goal was to launch our liquid staking or liquid restaking protocol. And then that was followed by our DeFi strategy vault and now our Ether.fi cash spending product. And so combine together, they create that and make DeFi for the app.
And I'm Nick from Mellow, and we're building a system for LRT, the different risk profiles and different curators. So modular system for issuing LRT.
I expect the protocol. Renzo is also like the order of transfer speaking. Radio that CM APP received and it's speaking for the and yeah, it's going into like remote. It doesn't.
Yeah, hey guys, Kilian from Swell Protocol. We originally were a liquid staking protocol, we still are. Then liquid restaking came along and we launched that product too. And now what we're really focusing on is Swell layer 2. So you can think about it as a liquidity layer to stack in LRT across the ecosystem. And then what we're doing is we're stacking there. I've heard about that before. So we're really bullish on what Polygon is doing there and yield to the Swell layer 2. Yeah, happy to be here.
Great. So just before that, we were talking about season 2, particularly the Unify season 2. We're kind of getting out of retail. I just wanted to get kind of a review. How do you think about users in general? We're kind of catching ourselves up. This kind of this kind of retail, but yeah, most people they would ABS. How's that change? Right on here.
So maybe I can go first. I there mentioned there the users in LRT, which is here a way that of course the user demand all, and I believe the concept like like this. one of users start like taking advantage of these opportunities on intra the future. And I most recent like at state of and ecosystem, but but it, but it, I oh, there. I can want them for Unify reasons like sunglasses are now coming up around base rollups and base sequencing is like everybody says the future of Ethereum is really bright, so they put on the sunglasses. But yeah, I would say still the idea is like it's for the user because the AVSs themselves have to start figuring out more as Eigenlayer itself evolves as well. Think around payments.
So does everyone agree here that the user is the retail audience or cater towards the invest?
I mean, I think there's one of the challenging aspects of restaking is that it's three-sided marketplace, right? And man, two-sided marketplaces are hard enough. Adding a third dimension to it makes it extremely more complicated. But yeah, I mean, I think you do have to look at it as there are multiple customers. AVSs are for sure a customer because they're buying what we're selling, right? Like we're selling ETH. The AVS needs to be buying it as security. And then on the other side, of course, you have users that are providing the ETH. And I thought you had the sunglasses because of this blinding projector.
Yeah, it also helps.
I was like, that's a good idea. I need to start doing that. But I like that it fits with the narrative.
Yeah,
Anything
yeah,
to add?
I think- go for it.
Yeah, I think in our case it's a bit different because like we have different curators in the system. It's more kind of B2B thing, and it's joint work to attract the users and liquidity working with curators. At the same time, like lots of curators, they're operators at the same time, and they bring the stake of their clients as well into the system. So for us, it's not that much retail play. It's more focused on B2B, and but still the main thing is to have some kind of sustainable yield from the side of the demand, from the side of AVS and networks, and this is also the main thing that we're jointly working on with curators. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd add there in terms of like the retail user base. What's a good reflection of that? Like look at the yields on Pendles. So I think like peak Eigenlayer hype, the implied yield for Pendle was around like 25 to 30%. And now like with the new symbiotic LRTs, it's around 16 to 17%. So I think that's one metric you can look at to see, okay, how hot is this market now and how much interest is there? And obviously how much TVL is going into that. So I think currently, of course, we all know it's toned down, but it could pick up really, really quickly again. So yeah, I think that's something you can look at to actually gauge where we are in the market.
Yeah, I think the definition of retail is pretty vague, right? Like what is retail? Like retail's coming, retail's buying meme coins, retail's not here yet. Like every week we have a different way of like putting an image to how retail looks like. And I think like it's like what we can say for sure is like how users are like is like the first set, the early set of users were more like experimentative, and they wanted to like they were more excited about like what's this new paradigm, what's the new thing that's happening, and like how can we participate in it the earliest. And like by extension that was also speculative as defined by pendle yields and points, etc., right? But I think like over time, regardless of what the definition of retail versus whale versus institution is, I think over time like it's almost inevitable that users move from more speculative and experimentative to more like sustainable, predictable yield in the future, right? And right now, the most predictable way of getting yield is probably like staking your ETH or lending it on Aave, for example, right? But over time, restaking is another avenue for users to offer users predictable yield. The yield itself like is not in ETH itself in the case of in restaking, but regardless, I think it's that's the direction that we're seeing users go into right now.
Cool. Yeah, so we've established three-sided marketplace. We talked a lot about retail, not a whole lot about AVSs. But the role of an LRT is to mediate the risk preferences of the three sides of this market. And as was mentioned previously, a number of these LRTs have kind of evolved out of the liquid staking marketplace and liquid staking machinery. What do you see as just the kind of primary dimensions of risk or approaches that you need to kind of introduce beyond what an LST has to do? You know, what are you thinking about from a risk perspective as you kind of add in this additional staking layer?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say that like the slashing is not here yet, and like the main stage for the real risk profiles will be here when the slashing will get live. And like I think for every system it makes a lot of sense to like choose wisely which AVS and networks you're getting into the composition of the LRTs. Also, for some use cases, probably it will be important to have some kind of algorithmic risk curation and algorithmic distribution of liquidity between the AVS. And I think the best example probably is rollups as a service, because you have lots of rollups in your ecosystem and you need to distribute the stake dynamically for economical security depending on TVL or depending on user activity or some other parameters. And I think there will be more like algorithmic use cases later. But still, the initial curation and the composition of AVS is very, very important. And like you have to have really strong risk curators for every system.
Yeah. So I would put it this way: LSTs, we had to worry about two things. Okay, what if the operator goes offline and starts slowing, like have inactivity leak for the users and slowly losing their money? Another one was slashing. Slashing basically has three rules: do not double propose, basically double sign on your proposals, do not do surrounding or surrounded votes or attestations on a certain block proposal. That is quite simple to control, right? Like that is a very well-defined parameters, like this is what we're gonna control. Now we're introducing AVSs. We're basically introducing programmable slashing, especially in the case of Symbiotic. It's not only now ETH, it's like other assets, it's also new rules to be slashing. There is going to be exogenous risks. There is going to be endogenous risks. Endogenous risk is like what we can control, the rules that we define. It can be double proposals. It can be other certain rules that happens in a consensus mechanism. While exogenous risks are, for example, an Oracle price feed on ETH versus USD. And we say, okay, if the price of ETH drops against USD, go liquidate or cause a slashing, essentially. These are going to be pretty complicated tasks to design, and they're going to be quite risky, while they might have higher rewards. So we have to be really careful once it comes to like LRTs, because now we're like dealing with a much like wider variety of landscape of like slashing. So I would still say as an LRT, the most valuable asset of an LRT is its users that bring the tokens, whether it's ETH or other like tokens. And LRT's like responsibility is actually creating a very well-defined strategy, communicate to AVSs, be transparent on the AVS side of how it is going.
So this is a great point. We've kind of established that the risk that an LRT needs to abstract over is immensely complex. There's just like 1,000 new dimensions, and all of them are more risky than they were previously. The financialization of that risk, you're boiling it down to one number, the LRT token. Why is it so? You're combining that into a singular strategy. I actually find it kind of odd that like everyone's chosen to kind of make this into a single token instead of kind of allowing for a greater expression of risk preference within the protocol.
So I think it's a trade-off between offering users the flexibility to choose their own restaking strategy that fits them the best versus offering the liquidity of that LRT can offer. And usually this liquidity extends into DeFi integrations, into lending market integrations, L2s, etc. Right? So essentially it becomes a trade-off between like how many choices can I make in terms of risk reward of AVSs versus what can I do with my LRT. And I think in the long run, the space will converge into users having to choose between, they can go either of the routes. So there's like a few marquee LRTs that you can use to do all of DeFi, or there's the flexible permissionless route that you can go, where you can like choose which risk reward makes the most sense for you, and even like go as far as like running your own node operators or validators to execute that risk reward strategy. So like we are so early right now that LRTs are not very different from a design challenge. Like LRTs are not very different from LSTs, right? So people can even like replace their ETH holdings with LST and by extension the LRT holdings, right? But going forward, like things gonna be way more complex for users to actually do this, and it's gonna well, to some extent, like it's gonna make a lot of existing DeFi redundant for LRTs, but on the brighter side, it's gonna make a lot of new possibilities that you can explore with LRTs.
I think it's especially important for the secondary market and for money markets because they need to control the risk. They need to have some really specific risk profile to have the assets utilized for the pools on money markets. And this also brings like much more utilization for LRTs. And probably in this case, money markets will have some kind of separate LRTs that they will accept as collateral.
Maybe the only thing I can add to that is like, and so the bet that Ether.fi is making is that, first of all, for sure there is going to be a demand and need for like a wide variety of different repackagings and risk profiles. Like definitely that's going to be a huge part of the market. But for most users, there is going to be sort of a happy medium, which is the choice that we're making is a super low risk conservative LRT that gives you boosted yields over and above staking, but at the same time really optimizes for making sure that you don't end up losing your capital. And so that happy medium allows pretty deep level of integration across L2s, DeFi protocols, liquidity depth, centralized exchanges, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the product that I think more, again, our mandate, average people, normal people will probably want. But that's, as I said, that doesn't mean that there's not a pretty significant market for more like bespoke, interesting variations.
Let's actually flip that around. So from the AVS side, why would I want to choose one LRT versus the other? What are the use cases here? What is the kind of point of differentiation here that makes sense?
Yeah. I think there are a couple of things involved here, as in like we all like kind of like got to the conclusion that yes, the design space is quite like not mature yet. That's why we haven't introduced like new packaging, new sort of strategies. But one thing as an AVS developer you want to like consider is first is on the restaking side, second is on programmable slashing. If you're taking the restaking path, meaning that you already taken in and staked asset, whether on the beacon chain or as an LSD, and you're securing your basically AVS with, you would want to know what are the security guarantees of this token or this restaked asset. If let's say it comes from Ethereum itself, if I am running an AVS, I would like to make sure that this underlying asset is not getting slashed. The beacon chain ETH is not getting slashed. There is not much inactivity leak. And for us at Puffer, we really care about decentralization risk on here as well, because if more decentralized, less risky, less single-party risk as well on the same side as well. And at the same time, there is the other side of things, which is the liquidation, the availability of the liquidity for that LSD or whether the LSD protocol that is like being restaked. Because again, the AVS themselves do not want to like all of a sudden lose their positions if the LRT itself is getting liquidated somewhere or getting slashed outside of their protocol. So these are like some of the very basic matters that each AVS should care about before like considering joining one of the LRT protocols. On top of all of these, Symbiotic, Eigenlayer, and other protocols have their own designs. They have to make sure that the LRT that they're choosing to deploy on, for example, do they have smart contract key management? Can they, like, what are the reliability on the operator side? Are operators going to manage the AVS keys correctly so they wouldn't just randomly get slashed and have a very bad reputable AVS?
So is everyone here planning to abstract over multiple restaking protocols? So Symbiotic and Eigenlayer and Karak? Like, or are you going to stick with one?
Yes, we plan to offer many options.
Yeah, I think it's like that would be like the most optimum way of offering the service to a user, where you don't even have to like decide which restaking platform you want exposure to, and instead like whichever AVS is giving me the best risk reward, the LRT will go and secure that AVS regardless of which platform they're on. That is the holy grail of like building a consumer app. But the truth is, like on the back end, they're like Eigenlayer, Symbiotic, Karak, like are these restaking platforms that are not necessarily compatible with each other, right? So even if even like for example, if I accept ETH, right, I can natively restake ETH on Eigenlayer, but I cannot natively restake ETH on Karak or Symbiotic. On the other side, like so, if I want to like secure an AVS with my ETH, it's almost impossible to do it on Karak or on Symbiotic. On the other side, like Eigenlayer has traditionally had caps for LSTs, right? So if it's a ETH, for example, that a user gives me as an LRT protocol, it's hard for an LRT protocol to secure AVSs on Eigenlayer, right? So whichever is the best ROI AVS on Karak or on Symbiotic, the game theory would dictate LRTs to go and secure that AVS instead of the most optimum AVS. So to answer your question, like it is probably the North Star here, but like the reality is like we're way too early and way too early on the design space to essentially make a choice here.
I feel like I'm hearing kind of like some conflicting information where it's like, okay, I'm going to abstract over everything, but I'm only going to use the safest AVSs. At the same time, there's not enough AVSs. There's not enough yield to actually satisfy the demand that retail has. So like, in my mind, this is just like subprime mortgage situation. Like we're gonna repackage the unsafe AVS loan and try to tranche that risk and then abstract it into the financialized asset, and we're all good. We've papered over it. Like, yeah, I'm straw manning here, but like argue against me.
Yeah, I will like probably add one thing to the previous question on like if we are gonna all go to these restaking. I think all of these new paradigms have their own definition. Like if Eigenlayer is merely restaking on ETH right now, whether it's an LST or whether it's beacon chain ETH, while somewhere like Symbiotic like expanded that umbrella and went to programmable slashing. Bring me your token into the vault and I might get it slashed. Like this is like a different like paradigm now that being introduced. Regarding the conflicting thing that you say, oh, we're gonna like go to all AVSs and then we're gonna sort of like pick the one that are least risky, or like we're gonna do this packaging carefully. Yes, I would say like for us, at least at Buffer, we're gonna like take a probably slightly slower approach on like really introducing these new risks, these new protocols especially. Like Karak is now accepting LRTs. This is clearly rehypothecation. Like you have a restake now.
Why not?
Yeah, so I mean, this is now like, it is as spicy as it gets now, but it is what it is. Like if you are securing, like I tell everybody, if you're securing bridge X with your LRT, and then you take that LRT and go secure bridge Y, now your bridge Y is at the risk of the bridge X that has been secured. So like you just bounce the risk. So yes, I would say certainly if a protocol decides to integrate with something like a Karak or Symbiotic, the product is packaged differently. Like the users also have the choice. This falls under that category that we were wondering, like, why don't you see more different tastes of restaking tokens? I think the design space is too early. That is going to rise. And new, actually, LRTs are defined on top of like Symbiotic or Karak itself. So users transparently can go and choose these different risk appetites themselves at this stage.
Who blows up here? Like we've acknowledged that there's risk.
Yeah.
None of us are taking that risk though. We're all safe. Like someone is blowing up in the system. Who is it?
Yeah, I would add that also it's probably important to have like riskier AVS and networks as well, because that's also why it's important to have permissionless systems like Symbiotic, because like the space is very new. It's not that much like really good business models yet, and you need to give the space for the new business models to iterate and to get more sustainable business models into the space.
Yeah, I mean, to your point of comparing like traditional leverage markets to LRTs, like I think it's an argument that has like come up very often, and I feel like it doesn't give justice to LRTs or like in like any sort of restaking derivative, is because, or staking derivative, is because when you package an instrument that's built on top of leverage, like the downside risk is all correlated with each other. So when you like package 10 houses on top of each other, the default risk is usually very correlated because it is dependent on the overall real estate market price. Like in this case, slashing risk, slashing risk between AVSs are not necessarily correlated. Like if you are using a bridge and you're using a DA, like person A versus person B, like both of them do not have to get slashed at the same time. Like there's nothing that dictates that they will get slashed at the same time. So going back, like there might be similarities that you're like pointing out between, you know, traditional leverage instruments and LRTs, but like this is like not any sort of leverage, and I don't think there is, like if you dig deep enough, like from a risk reward perspective, it's very different from how leverage has been perceived usually, and especially in crypto where things are way more volatile than the traditional markets.
Are there any kind of core risk centers that you're concerned about that just haven't been discussed yet? So we talked about liquidity, talked about slashing. I mean, what else are you kind of concerned about? What are you working on in your protocol?
Well, I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
We haven't talked about it. Maybe like it's kind of obvious, but like the primary job of an LRT, the decision that an LRT is making, there's three basic decisions. One is which AVSs to support. So that's decision number one. Two is how much ETH to provide an AVS. And three is what's the overlap, right? Because you can have the same ETH securing 20 AVSs, or you can have, you know, one ETH only securing one unique AVS. And the risk profiles really emerge from those three choices: which AVSs, how much ETH, and you know, what's the overlap. So that's fundamentally where the risk management comes in. So being conservative, you know, when it comes to you know, the risk profile of an LRT comes down to selecting ideally like pretty well vetted and trustworthy, audited, et cetera, good AVSs, not doing too much overlap, which I agree that restaking doesn't really, leverage is not the right term to think about it, because it's not really, there's no leverage because there's no price sensitivity. Like you're not going, the AVS doesn't, the LRT doesn't blow up if the price of ETH crashes, right? Like that, those are orthogonal things. But you're compounding risk for sure. If you're overlapping a ton of AVSs, you're compounding the risk that you're taking. So the conservative approach is.
Maybe it does though. I mean, if you're pricing your security contracts in dollars and ETH crashes, now you have shortfall.
You mean in terms of the yield that the AVSs are providing?
No, in terms of the security purchase that AVSs are making. As far as I understand, most of the LOAs are dollar denominated.
Yeah, but I mean, those LOIs were just marketing documents. It really, you're right that it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes no sense to price them in dollars because yes, exactly. What are you going to like, as the price of ETH adjusts, you're going to readjust the amount of that. There's no mechanism to even do that. So
I mean, like on that side, like if you want to go back to the early days of Ethereum, if we can like assume a nation state attack, yes, then we can price it in dollars and say, okay, if the price of ETH crashed, then my economic security of my protocol to USDs now have dropped. Maybe we can like consider it in there, but yeah, I do agree that those LOIs are sort of like to sort of get the people behind it in some senses. But if we are talking about security and security in terms of like a network attack, then these days we have to also get the dollar amount in consideration, because then, yeah, if the dollar cost amount to attack a network like drops, then it is actually less secure. But yeah, like to extend on what Mike said, actually, yes, there are different tastes of slashing. There's shared pooled security. There is also individual, like attributable security, which you say, okay, only 30% of my ETH goes only to this one AVS, while the rest of it doesn't go to there. So, but yeah, these are the different things that's coming to play.
I think I can add there. I mean, we've been speaking to some AVSs, and what some of them are thinking is actually staking their own token and using that as a buffer in the event of a slashing event. So, that's quite interesting because that can act as a way to prevent, the LRT users getting slashed, and rather take the hit on the AVS token itself. So, I'm pretty confident that will grow and that will become something that most AVSs do.
So, so the price of ETH crashing reduces your economic security, right? But isn't that like so much better than borrowing economic security in your own token? Like if you're any other, like the fact that ETH offers much more stability than any other altcoin. So if you launch your own altcoin as an AVS and you are borrowing economic security from that, like essentially asking people to stake that coin so that you can, get economic security from that token. The elasticity of the token itself is so much higher, like the volatility is so much higher compared to ETH, right? So ETH offers like way more stability, like relative stability as an economic security asset than your token itself. And I think that's the beauty of restaking, right? Like even if the market's like, even if the ETF doesn't get approved or whatever, like you're not going to lose 90% of your security overnight. That does happen with a lot of like alt L1s, for example, in the
Yeah, I
last
think
few
we're
years.
on the same page there. The question is just what obligations are you making to external parties, AVSs? So we kind of touched on currency risk potentially if you are denominating dollars. Apparently, I hope there's no AVSs in the audience, but apparently that's not real. There's also potentially duration risk if AVSs want a long-term contract. I don't know if anybody is thinking about duration at all in your protocol. And then all these things just interact with each other, so liquidity risk, currency risk, duration risk, like slashing.
Yeah, I mean, especially like on the smart contract side as well, like we want to make sure the AVS, like for example, like has enough time lock for the LRT to make decisions. If like a malicious actor just jumps in on an AVS and say, okay, any signature the operator produces is now slashable, basically negative 100% APR on that AVS, like yes, LRT has to like make a decision on that too. But yeah, you're correct on the side of risk.
Yeah, I think like for the previous question, it's also important that there is another side of the risk composition that's on the side of operators, and probably it's not covered that much. It's a smaller part of risk composition, but still you have different profiles on the side of operators, and you need also to have some statistics on the slashing events, on the uptimes and other things. And this is also like another part that you have to take into account when you're making the composition for the LRTs.
Anyone think about duration?
Duration, I would say duration can be just very much automated, right? Like duration matters like if you have an automated strategy, sort of like if let's say an AVS is like really the request for an AVS is dropping. Again, I'll go back to the bridge because the bridges are the most obvious AVSs. Let's say the liquidity or the traffic through your bridge is actually dropping and you had it like $100 million worth of ETH security on backing it and you're like, okay, I don't need that anymore because I can reutilize this ETH somewhere else. It can be a very automated strategy. I know like Gauntlet team is actually designing some of those like strategy managers that are very more on the automated side, and you can do that. So that can be one way to actually like get around the issue of like the duration as well.
Automation feels that's just magic. Like, what are you bringing to the automation then?
Like what do you mean? Like in terms of like
you're optimizing for something, and you need like to kind of build an optimization around the context of the protocol.
Yes.
Right?
But that can be like, I mean, strategy management can be one of them. But you can't really like say an AVS, like I would put AVSA on a trial version now, or I would put I mean, you can choose as an LRT to vote by the governance, say like, hey, you're on your 1 month trial version and I only cap you at 10K ETH. Come back later if I see your performance. There is that option, of course, as well to like mitigate some of these risks.
I think the trial period is right now, right? Like, isn't like right now we're in like a beta phase where AVS, like there's no payments, there's no slashing, so now AVS, but there's still economic security, so AVSs can still experiment with eigenlayer, get used to it, you know, try to like, you know, with the various flavors and various participants in the eigenlayer get acquainted with that, and then like have a much more optimal way of executing their economic security strategy when, or shared security strategy when things are buttoned up. On duration, like I think there's been a lot of discussions around whether POS should have a long-term and a short-term, you know, should treat short-term and long-term stakers differently, like pretty much like how traditionally the US government or the US Treasury would treat a 30-year-old bond differently compared to like, you know, let's say a 10-year bond, right? And I think there's still value, and I think like if you zoom out, I think there's probably going to be space for that. One of the reasons we haven't done that is like it's just not been the priority for a lot of users, right? But if you think about it, like permissionlessly speaking, there should be a way, and probably like, you know, an integration with LRT is probably the best way for an AVS to have economic security, like time-locked economic security, and offer different yields to LRTs based on how much are they willing to commit, right? And like it also depends on the use case for that AVS. Like some AVSs do not necessarily need, let's say, a 6-month economic security, but some AVSs, for example, like, you know, let's say a training model, like you need to be like secure for all times for like, say, a duration of 6 months when you're training a model. And at any given point of time, if you're not, like if your security is like $10, then there's no point of having economic security for the entire duration, like for the 6 months itself, right? So what I mean to say is like, depending on the use case of AVSs, like some AVSs would really like, you know, depending on the product, would really prefer having a fixed time lock security as a nice to have over, you know, short-term flexible security. So
Yeah, it seems like from the AVS side, I want to rent an apartment. Like I want a year-long lease. I want to know what I'm paying.
Yeah.
Like want to know what I'm getting. Like that, something regular. So that's in my mind where the duration comes from.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in the current climate, there's just such a big supply of security, so they can really choose who they want. But I think a more interesting dynamic is once the payments go live, like which AVS has the highest like quality of yield, right? Is it just their token? Is it a mix of some economic activity that they're doing? And I think what's interesting there is, let's say it's Lagrange. Let's say Lagrange just wants $1 billion of security, right? Which of the LRTs and which of the restakers actually are the ones supplying the security to Lagrange, and how does that affect the yield that they can sort of negotiate? So I think that's going to be interesting going forward, and is one thing I don't really see people talk about.
It's also probably the thing around the UX for the AVSs, because like every LRT is kind of an entry point for the AVSs and networks to get the operators to get the stake, and I think it's also the question of making the better UX for AVSs to get onboarded and to have less friction on the onboarding stage.
Great. So I mean, we've talked about risks, we've talked about use cases. I think the thing that kind of abstracts over all of this is insurance, because you need to kind of absorb risk and have some kind of view on the risk that the protocol itself is exposed to. How are you thinking about insurance, just from a sizing perspective, from a how you're going to apply it? Like, where does insurance come into play, like an insurance fund that you're providing?
Yeah, I think like on the operator side, I know Nick mentioned it earlier, but a lot of, if you work with good professional operators, a lot of them actually have their own insurance in place. So that is one way to do it. Another way is to take protocol revenue and sort of build that up into a fund and use that as an insurance mechanism. Yeah, but there's different approaches to that.
So
Yeah,
what like percentage of the secured capital base should you have on hand as an insurance fund?
So I think there is a way to like mathematically come to a number that might make sense over here. Like if, let's say I'm securing like 10 AVSs and every AVS has let's say 1% slashing down 1% slashing for downtime, and let's say 3% slashing for double signing, right? So in this case, like if all of them have the same and I'm securing all 10 AVSs, then the maximum value that I can lose given everything goes wrong is 30% of my funds, right? Like, so it's like 3% times 10. For every AVS, 3% is the worst. So 3% times 10, 30% is the worst that I can lose, right? So I would like to call it, let's say, max loss of this strategy of securing AVSs. And in this case, like, to answer your question, Sam, like the insurance fund should ideally be at least 30% of the total funds, the total TVL, because even if like the world, like even if this like quantum actually becomes a thing and everything goes to zero, like you would still, like the insurance fund will always make sure that the users will get their capital back.
Yeah, I think in our case it's a bit different because it's mostly on the side of curators, and like they understand really well which risk profiles they may need for the specific clients, and they can issue different LRTs with a different composition of AVS and different like restaking, like how much stake you restake many times or something. And in this case, you're getting like lots of different risk profiles, and you can choose between them as a user from the retail, or if you're a B2B user, then you can just directly get the profile you want.
So external parties should be underwriting the risk. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like this is like an important thing. Like we have to really redefine like insurance here, because I don't know if it works the same way that we know insurance works, really like as part of like software or like SLAs. What as an LRT is happening here, let's say the LRT itself has vetted AVS enough, the LRT implemented anti-slashers for that AVS, but now a lot of the trust falls on the operator side. Let's say the AVS is all cleared up on the slashing side, you're good, you're honest, everything chill. Now, all of the trust is falling on the operator side of things. If operator is malicious, wants to deliberately get slashed or actually slash user funds, there might be an issue here. So we have to make sure to either, like this is the problem we solved, for example, on the Ethereum staking side is we said, okay, there should be a minimum like economic security bonding these operators to actually be able to, if a slashing happens, actually covers for part of it or completely 100% of it. So I would say operator side is the most important side of things as an LRT that we have to be careful. Either do provide insurance for them, have them provide insurance for the users, or just economically bond them in these restaking.
But you're the one interacting with the operators. Like the operators don't really have direct contact with the LRT token holders, so you have to say what the self-bond
actually,
is, right?
Yeah, the operators do have direct contact with the LRT token holders because they get voted, at least at Puffer, it's like that. They would be picked, like right now, of course, we haven't established the DAO yet, but all the operators would get picked by the DAO governance vote. And they can be replaced at any moment at given time as well by the DAO itself.
I was told to leave a couple minutes for questions. I already didn't leave enough, so thank you so much. I want to take at least one, maybe two questions, if there are any. There should be a mic floating around. I have no idea where it is, though. You can also raise your hand if you have a question. I can't see super well, so I'll rely on the generosity of others to find the questions. No? Okay.
Yep, there's one.
Oh, there's a question right there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite low. What about LRTs on other networks, not Ethereum, maybe like Bitcoin, maybe like other one? What your thought on, like, what your personal stake on that?
Yeah, other blockchains, restaking ecosystems, is that of interest to you? How do you think about the difference?
We're going to stay EVM, but
Ether.fi going to stay Ethereum. That makes sense.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think restaking already exists on Solana, and Bitcoin restaking is going to be a thing. So I think those are probably sensible ecosystems.
Yeah, as Puffer, we're very much actually plugged into the infrastructure layer of Ethereum itself. We're like pretty much like working on pre-confirmations, base roll up, all of these new paradigms that are set to improve the transaction time and also get rid of the liquidity fragmentation of Ethereum. So we're going to be staying here for quite a while. But I would say restaking is a very great way to solve things without having to fork your protocol. So yeah, maybe other blockchains would start using it as well.
Yeah, I think for Renzo, I think the goal has always been to make restaking easy accessible to be like, so to make it like the optimum way for users to restake, right? So regardless of where, which asset has the most demand, and regardless of the chain it is on, I think it's probably the best, like it does the most justice to users if we actually go there, right? So right now it looks like ETH has the most demand, but that's from like, at the end of the day, AVSs themselves, like networks, coordination networks themselves decide like which type of economic securities they want, right? So tomorrow if they want BTC security, tomorrow if they want stablecoin security, tomorrow they want like Malady security, Shiba Inu security, like at the end of the day, like if there's demand, I think any service should ideally offer that to their users. And like that's how we're thinking about it.
I think it's also probably good to have the ecosystems a bit isolated on the side of restaking at this point, because in other case you just expose more risks from other ecosystems to your ecosystem, and that's the way to do it at this point.
All right, I want to thank all of our panelists so much. I grilled you guys. You did great. This was really lovely, and I'm sure our audience thanks you as well.
Thank you.